face of the Democratic response to coronavirus is House Leader Nancy Pelosi. She's been touted as a master negotiator. She gets praise for keeping her caucus of Democrats together.
But a new piece by American Prospect executive editor David Dayen asks what Pelosi has actually accomplished with all that power, especially looking at what Democrats gained or didn't gain in the CARES Act, the fourth stimulus package, and the Unpassed HEROES Act. David joins us now via Skype for more on all of this. Great to see you, sir.
Good to see you, David.
Okay, good to see you guys.
So this was written sort of as a response to a new biography of Pelosi that recently came out. Just give people some of the context of her kind of origin story in the way that she has gone about wielding power in this town.
Yeah, the book is called Pelosi. It's by Molly Ball, who's a big Time magazine correspondent. And it really charts her rise to power. A lot of people consider that, Nancy Pelosi, she was a congresswoman from San Francisco. She must be this crazy liberal. She got into power really as a fundraiser. That's how she got her start in politics. She had the biggest house because her husband was a wealthy financier. And so she would hold fundraiser events at her house. And the first quarter of the book is really about her using those relationships to acquire power. And she ended up becoming a congresswoman because Sala Burton, who was the congresswoman from that district, replacing her husband who died, Sala Burton got cancer, and Pelosi was her chief fundraiser. And she essentially willed the seat over to Pelosi, who spent $1 million in 6 weeks and sent mailers telling more conservative house owners in the district that she would not raise their taxes. So this is sort of where she comes from. And it's very transactional. It's very much about acquiring power for power's sake, without much philosophy or ideology behind it. And I think that's important background and context for what we're seeing with Pelosi certainly through her second speakership.
Yeah, I mean, that's particularly interesting. Well, how does that manifest itself then, David, in the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression this time around, and in the last worst economic crisis since the Great Depression and the Great Recession when she was also in charge?
That's right. Nancy Pelosi does not have like an issue set to fall back on and core sort of principles to fall back on when these crises strike. She's not really associated with any sort of cause or action. She says in the book that in an interview that her main concern and motivation is concern for the world's children, which is like the most nondescript thing you could possibly think of as a politician. She's not really associated with any causes. So when this strikes, both times actually, Republicans have an idea. They want to protect businesses. They want to make sure businesses are bailed out, and they follow that strategy with laser precision. Pelosi just doesn't have sort of a North Star there, and so when a crisis strikes, there's just this sort of jumble of policies that there's no real priority there, and it shows in the way that she actually goes forward. So the main bill so far that has passed, the CARES Act, that was a Mitch McConnell special that Pelosi and to a lesser extent Chuck Schumer just sort of tweaked a little bit and then presented to their caucuses fully formed, and it just doesn't have just sort of any kind of underlying principle or philosophy behind it.
Right. And you point out a very specific instance where she gets very defensive when she's questioned about her sort of strategic approach to all of this by Jake Tapper. Let's take a listen to that.
So Cuomo says he would have insisted on state funding in the last bill. And now Senator McConnell saying he wants to push the pause button. Yes. Was this a tactical mistake by you and Senator Schumer?
Just calm down. We will have state and local, and we will have it in a very significant way. It's no use going on to what might have been. The administration never even wanted to do.
And David, this is the thing is basically, you know, we kept hearing we're going to get these great things down the road. Just wait for the next bill, wait for the next bill. But when Republicans got basically everything they wanted the first time around, they got all their goodies for business, there was no incentive for them to give Democrats anything else that they might want.
Right. I mean, that report was 2.5 months ago, and we have not seen any state and local fiscal aid since then. And that has really had a dramatic impact. So states and localities that have seen these yawning gaps in revenue and have not had any budgetary support and don't see it coming, they had to think about reopening their economies a little earlier because they simply had to get some revenue in the door. And in many places that has led, including here where I sit in California, to premature reopenings that have led to this second first wave of cases. So it had a real impact. If you don't have a strategy at the beginning of how are these pieces in this CARES Act going to fit together? I mean, we did this thing with enhanced unemployment, but then we also had the Paycheck Protection Program for small businesses, which was operating at complete cross purposes. Are we supposed to put people on unemployment? Are we supposed to keep people in their jobs? Are we supposed to bring people back because we have this program that pays them to be on the payroll? So they're supposed to be brought back to work. What about the state and local aspect? That could be a counteracting austerity. None of these things were really thought about, I think, certainly by Pelosi. It was just sort of catch as catch can, and it has a real impact. And even as we sit here today, there have been no negotiations on this fourth package, which was this like wish list, the HEROES Act, which threw in everything in the kitchen sink because, again, there's no priorities being made. The only thing that it didn't add is the kind of things like automatic stabilizers, in other words, keeping the same relief programs until the crisis lifts, because Pelosi arbitrarily decided that that would cost too much money and it would be scored too high by the Congressional Budget Office, which shows this other aspect. To the extent that Pelosi has a philosophy, it's that we can't do very much of anything because we have to cut the deficit. So
well, I think, Yeah, let's expand on that, because I mean, look, I mean, I'm the chief critic here of austerity mindset in the Republican Party, but I mean, one of the things that the Republicans have at least sometimes successfully gone after them for is, of talking about spending too much. And it seems that Democrats, people like Pelosi, have very much internalized that austerity narrative. Is that a core part of her politics?
Yeah, this is someone who gave a eulogy on the House floor for Pete Peterson, who was the chief austerian in Washington for like 30 years. The guy who's bankrolled the Committee for the Responsible Federal Budget and the Peterson Foundation, and was, had it out for Social Security for years and years, saying we can't afford it. This is part of the Pelosi mindset, is that, we have a meager safety net and we have to protect it. We can't expand it. We have to just preserve whatever little scraps that we can get, whatever little charity we can get for people, and go no further. It's this sort of defensive crouch. Pelosi comes into office in the House under Reagan and kind of acts like he's still there through her actions, and it's been debilitating, especially in this time when we need massive federal spending to prop up the economy.
It explains actually so much, like that mindset, not just in Pelosi, but in so many of the sort of Democratic establishment leaders here. It explains so much of how we've gotten to this moment in our politics and the policy landscape that we have. David, what would you say to someone who says, this is unfair, you're putting all the blame on Pelosi's shoulders, surely she was in consultation with the rest of the House caucus, this is all a negotiation, you're being too harsh to lay this all at her feet? What would you say?
Well, Pelosi was definitely not in consultation with the rest of the House caucus. I mean, there was no proxy voting in this key portion of March and April. So every other member of Congress was at home, and Pelosi kind of commandeered the entire House Democratic caucus and did these negotiations by herself. It was her in a room with Steve Mnuchin and Mitch McConnell, and they figured things out. And then she brought them to her caucus and said, take it or leave it. So if there's anyone among Democrats who was responsible for this crisis response, it's Nancy Pelosi. I think that's undeniable. The fact that she was dealing with the Republicans, there was leverage here, I feel like, that was unused. So Republicans knew and spent $2 billion or $2 trillion in federal money because they knew that they were in a very tough position. This was antithetical to most Republican ideology to spend these extreme amounts of money. And to do it in a way that was time limited and insufficient and inadequate for ordinary people, while billionaires and the wealthy and corporations got this huge bailout that is still ongoing, this giant money cannon that went to the Federal Reserve. It either it shows priorities or it shows a lack of interest in priorities and really just power for power's sake. So, I urge people to read the story and where I make the case.
I also urge people to read the story. Excellently done, David. Always great to see you.
Thank you, David.
All right, thanks.
Next on Rising, Kanye West. He gave a wide-ranging interview for Forbes about the state of politics today.
It's really
We're gonna
something.
share some of the highlights when Rising continues.